Starting with the personality components, id, ego and superego. Starting with id reflects the basic or innate desire, which is uh, based on the pleasure-seeking behavior, aggression and sexual impulses. So impulsiveness and pleasure-seeking is the key concept of id, and this is regardless of the consequence of the impulses and has no regard for rules or social convention. So these are the primitive reflexes which is present in the person at very early stage, at very early age, when the person is infant, and this id is totally uh, is present in the newborn child. So before explaining the ego, one has to understand what is superego. Superego is based on morality concept. It reflects the moral and ethical concepts, values, and parental and social expectations. It is directly opposite of the id and acts as a guide for behavior. So it also shows the matureness of a person, how the person take the decision, and superego is also seen as a purveyor of rewards and punishment. It may lead into the reward, feeling of pride and satisfaction, or uh, may into the feeling of shame and guilt, depending on the which part of ego the superego is functioning. So superego is consisting of two systems. One is conscience and second one is ideal self. Conscience is the inner voice that tells us when we have done something wrong, and ideal self or ego ideal is an imaginary picture of how you ought to be and represents career aspirations or how to treat other people and how to behave as a member of society. So conscience and ideal self are the two components. Now coming to the id, id is a balancing force or mediating force between the id and superego. Ego represents the mature and adaptive behavior that allows a person to function successfully in the world. And Freud believed that anxiety which resulted from the ego attempts to the balance the impulsive instincts of the id and stringent rule of the superego. So it helps us to find deal with the reality and ensuring that our action taken into account both our need and the realities of the situation are met. In simple form, you can see in the bottom of this slide. So id, what the id is, if someone says I want it now, is id, which is based on the pleasure principle, impulses, and it is required immediately and without knowing the consequences of that act. What the superego says, you can't have it, it's not right. It says, I want it now. Superego says, you can't have it, it's not right. What the ego does is balancing the id and superego. The ego says, we need to plan and wait in order to have it. I cannot have it immediately, and morally it is not right, but I will have it after planning it to get the required. Examples of id are in the behavior, sexual desire is considered as id, which is regardless of the societal norms and consequences. Hunger also. Aggression, for instance, if you feel irritated, insulted or frustrated, then you might feel a sudden impulse to react aggressively. This is the id which is working. And acting without regard the reality or social norm is the uh, characteristic of aggression. But the super ego, what is done by the super ego is it pull back your aggressive impulses and prevent you from the lashing out or causing harm. Greed is also example of id. Immediate gratification. For example, a person may skip school to attend a music concert, and this time the person is ignoring potential academic repercussions he will have in the future, and he is immediately satisfying his pleasure by attending the music event. So this is immediate gratification, self preservation. Another is self-preservation, means protecting the self. If the id might compel someone to flee from a dangerous situation, like in the fire or a burning building, without pausing to collect the belongings, the person will flee from the situation. But this has another aspect also. The persons who are firefighters, who run into fire to save the persons, tend to have a very well developed superego or focus on others' desire, such as positive social regard over personal safety. So this is another aspect of self-preservation as an example of id. Sudden emotional outburst. This is also based on the pleasure-seeking principle or impulsive behavior, jealousy and envy. Addictive behavior is also example of id, in which immediate gratification is uh, taken to the priority on other pleasurable things. Impulsive actions like quitting the job uh, because of a minor disagreement with the colleague or the boss, and it seeks like a immediate relief from the stressful situation, and at the same time ignoring the financial implications and future employment prospects of quitting the job. Reckless behavior, which is high risk behavior, like illegal street racing driven by the adrenaline rush, and this is also uh, does not think about the consequences of reckless driving. Excessive consumption of food or anything is also example of id. Violent fantasies, and narcissism is the self-centeredness, and it seeks to fulfill its own desire without considering the uh, consequence upon the others' behavior. Moving to the behavioral motivation by Freud concept. Freud believed that the human behavior functions at three levels of awareness. One is conscious, one is preconscious, and unconscious. The conscious refers to the perception, thought, or emotions that are exist in the person's awareness. What the person knows at the immediate time is conscious level of awareness. Preconscious is the person can recall the event with some effort. It is not in the conscious mind. Person does not know or aware about the emotion, feelings, or their thought, but it can be surfaced to the consciousness. For example, an adult remembering what he or she did, thought, or felt as a child. So, childhood memories surfaced into the consciousness is the subconscious part. The next is unconscious. Unconscious is the realm which includes most defense mechanism and some instinctual drive or motivation. This remains in the unconscious part and cannot be bring to the awareness. This is unconscious. One, the thought which cannot be brought to the conscious mind. So he thought that the behavior is motivated by our subconscious thought or feelings, and Freudian slip, which means slips of tongue. Sometimes the person say something without knowing what he said, and it spontaneously come into the awareness. This is called as Freudian slip. And for example, someone says, "You look portly today," to an overweight friend instead of "You look pretty today." So the thought is in the uh, subconscious mind, and it is brought to the conscious mind, and he says that slips are not accidents or coincidences. These are rather indication of subconscious feeling or thoughts that accidentally emerge in casual day-to-day conversation. So by this picture you can understand what is id. Id is instincts, ego is reality, superego is morality. In another picture, you can see the unconscious mind, which is below the, this is the tip of, this is iceberg, which has a tip and a submerged portion. The submerged portion is unconscious mind, which is related to id, and the ego and superego are somewhat submerged, and it is above the level of water, which is conscious mind. And when the subconscious part of ego and superego comes into the conscious, which can be said as a subconscious. This is another picture which depicts it as a aggressive impulse, and the ego as a calm and cool emotion which balance the superego. Ego is a moral and mature thinking which tries not to say or to say to do